Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are on a mission to answer 4 questions from some of the best leaders and leadership minds in the country. So today we are thrilled to have special guest, Giles Kyser. So welcome, Giles.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much, Dave.
All right. Well, introduce yourself to the listeners, a little bit of your background, kind of who you are, what you do. Give us the scoop.
Okay. I guess I'll give you what I would refer to as the Reader's Digest version. I grew up mostly in Northern Virginia. I was born in California when my dad was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Marines. I was born in Camp Pendleton, California. We moved back to Quantico, Virginia in 1963. And my dad's last 10 years in the Marine Corps, he was either overseas or in Vietnam or back here in this area. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, which is unusual for a military kid in that I stayed relatively static. My daughter paid the price for that later. She moved 8 times. So I guess karma has a way of coming back and getting you.
It's almost like being in the military and growing up in Hampton Roads. You know, it's kind of like you don't stay in Norfolk.
No, yeah. So in any event, grew up in Northern Virginia in Prince William County and went to public high school there. Applied to the service academies out of high school. Did not make it my first year. I was accepted at Air Force in West Point and a few others, but didn't make my primary goal, which was the Naval Academy. So I took a year of prep school down at the Marine Military Academy in Harlingen, Texas, way down in the very tip of Texas. It's a prep school run by retired Marines, most of which are retired Marine drill instructors. So you can imagine it was a fairly straightforward and binary existence, but a tremendous leadership lab, frankly, because not only were we led and taught by some of the finest leaders in the history of the Marine Corps, but we're in a laboratory of, I would say, peer leadership, in that other cadets who are part of the Marine Military Academy Corps of Cadets are in leadership positions. So you exposed to leadership at an early age from a military perspective. Also grew up doing Boy Scouts and those sorts of things. So a lot of exposure to different types of leaders, peer leadership, as well as leadership by example. Was accepted, went to the Naval Academy in summer of 1981, graduated in 1985, and can talk about some of those amazing leaders at the U.S. Naval Academy that I was exposed to and served as examples and mentors for me throughout my career. And then left and commissioned into the Marines in 1985, then spent 24 years in the infantry and special operations world in the Marine Corps. And in the joint world, a number of different combat tours: Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Bosnia, Kosovo, Africa, and then Iraq in 2004. Spent time in and out of the Pentagon at mid-level with the Marine staff, and then at the very highest level with the Secretary of Defense staff and the Secretary of the Navy staff. Retired from the Marines in 2009 and have been in various business roles since then, to include a defense electronics company where I ended up being president and CEO, a company that would actually have a subsidiary here in the U.S., parent company in the U.K., and grandparent company in Italy. Then have been in various different roles, both on the manufacturing side, and now I'm with an Alaskan Native 8A called Gold Belt, and we do rapid acquisitions of both commodities and services for the entire federal market.
Oh, wow.
So that's what I've been doing for my career up till now. I'm 63 years old. Obviously, a lot of other interests beyond that. But I think, to kind of circle back to why we're here today, the thing that has always sort of lit my fire and inspired me is leadership. And being around people who are good at it, watching what they are able to accomplish, how they do what they do under various circumstances. And I've seen, obviously, leaders in the military, both in and out of combat. I've seen leaders in business, in crises, as well as in when the times are good. And then when you're rebuilding or mergers or whatever it is. So I've had the privilege of being exposed to mostly very, very good leaders. But in the course of that, you also see some things that are probably not the direction you want to head if you're a leader. But the other part is I think you pick up little gold nuggets along the way, either from those personal experiences or from reading, or many cases just from listening and watching, which are very, very important things for any leader to be able to do if you're going to be good at it. So I guess that's the Reader's Digest version of who I am. I'm married. I have the most amazing spouse on the planet. She and I actually met when we were in high school.
Wow.
We didn't date in high school, but later on, my last year at the Naval Academy, we started dating and got married about a year and a half after I graduated, and we have been together ever since then, coming up on 39 years now. And we have a daughter who lives not far from us in Virginia as well. She's married to the love of her life, incredible young lady, just talented, smart, like her mom, beautiful, the whole thing. I mean, you know, she's a triple threat in anybody's book, and I will acknowledge that I way outkicked my coverage with Chris, my wife. So I just thank God every day that she continues to be baffled and hasn't figured out yet that she should probably have kicked me to the curb a long time ago.
That well, it's funny. A couple things that I picked up on that you were saying. One, it was very politically correct verbiage on basically, okay, well, I learned what to do from great leaders, and basically I learned what not to do, right? from their screw ups. I was like, all right, well put, you know. But I think sometimes you can learn almost as much from, you know, learning the way what not to do than kind of what to do. I used to joke when I first started in the fire department, an old rickety rundown fire station, and they had 2x4 bolted to the wall with cup hooks, and they had the clipboards up there for all the checkoff sheets. And I used to just, in my mind, I used to think about just two of these clipboards up there, kind of like, oh, when I get to be the boss or I get to be the leader, I get in that position, right? One clipboard was what to do, right? You in my mind, and then the kind of the what not to do. Well, it seemed like the what to do, you know, had a few bullet points on it or whatever, and then the what not to do looked like the old dot matrix green and white tax paper at tax time, right? It just seemed to keep going, and I'm like, I was kind of despondent at first about haven't worked, you know, the what to do part of it, but then I realized, well, you know what, if I just took the what not to do kind of list in my mind and just did literally the exact opposite, I probably eventually stumble onto something right.
Well, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think you do see leadership examples on the good and bad side, and you do learn more from your mistakes. I know oftentimes I learn more from my mistakes than I did from my successes. And a smart leader not only learns from his own mistakes, but he takes the time to learn from other people. So that the what not to do clipboard is a great place to start. And that's not to say that you're not going to step on some of those same landmines along the way, because you will, because that clipboard will have escaped your mind, and you'll step on it anyway, and then it'll remind you, oh yeah, I've heard about this, and I actually read about it, and I chose to make the same mistake anyway. I mean, there's only so much that you can keep in your
very true
in your brain housing group in order to make the right decision. So that's where I think honing your leadership instincts and honing a sort of set of core values and principles and sort of things that you're not going to compromise on, if you can do that and maintain that, I think you educate your instincts. And when you educate those instincts, either through personal experience or reading or listening or whatever it happens to be, when you educate those instincts, you tend to make better decisions. Not all the time. You're still going to punt some into the stands. That's just going to happen. Or circumstances will be such that you'll make a mistake that you probably shouldn't have made if you had. And if you're really honest with yourself and you look in the mirror, you know that you would have made a better decision if you had done what your instincts were telling you to do in the first place, or you didn't decide to be lazy that day. Because those are choices. Every time you're presented with a situation, it's a choice. And you can choose to do the right thing, the thing that comports with and aligns with those best examples and best practices of leaders, or you can choose to, maybe I can't quite, I'm going to go over here today and normally you learn very quickly that perhaps you should have trusted. And that's when I talk about educating your instincts. That's where, when you get those things reinforced over time, it's easier and easier to make a decision that aligns with those things than when you're necessarily a young leader, because you don't have the benefit of all of those mistakes or years of experience of your own mistakes or other people's mistakes to fall back on, and those things. So your instincts are still yet to be developed. And that's why, particularly for young people, and I think anybody, but especially for young leaders, reading. Find books about leaders, and leaders are found everywhere. They're found in sports, they're found in business, they're found in the military, they're found in organizations like the fire department. And there are plenty of books and papers and podcasts and all kinds of those things. Find some and listen and read them and do that, because there's thousands of years of leadership experience out there that you can tap into if you are willing to take the time to listen with your eyes, with your brain, and with your ears.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I know you always hear the term leaders are readers, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. Like you said, if you could take somebody's autobiography on leadership and you take 60, 70 years of their experience and delve it into a few hours, reading a book, I mean, to be able to absorb that much experience in that short of amount of time, it definitely kind of short circuits the process, can speed it up along by, like I said, learning from them. And something else you mentioned and I thought was really good, especially you were talking about for younger leaders, keying it back to, you'd mentioned about, okay, I might not remember the entire list. I don't have the bandwidth to remember all right, here's everything I'm going to do when I get into the spot. Here's everything I'm not going to do. Although big picture stuff like, oh, that guy was a jerk to me. Oh, maybe I just won't be a jerk, right? There's a lot involved in that. But I like when you talked about having like a set of core values. And if you just take all your decisions and weigh them up, does this jive with my core values? Yes or no? Even if I don't know exactly what to do, but at least it's congruent with my values. Probably more times than not, you're going to be right. But I said, always, even if it's core values, execution wise, it still may be the wrong thing to do. But at least maybe for the right reasons or whatever. But I like having that, pairing it to your core value type of aspect. To like, I don't have to remember everything. I just have to know, is this congruent with what I believe? My mission, my core values. I like that a lot.
Now, I think, and I will tell you that, like I said, kind of growing up around Marines and growing up around the Marine Corps and being exposed to those things all the time, the Marine Corps spends an inordinate amount of time in comparison to most other organizations focusing on those basic core values. I mean, I will tell you that whether you run into a Marine out there today, whether he served 3 years or 43 years, and you look him in the eye and you say, okay, what are the core values of the United States Marine Corps? Reflexively, almost like Pavlov's dog, okay, he will say the Marine Corps' core values are honor, courage, and commitment. Period. Full stop. That's it. Done. Okay. And then if you ask him, okay, what is the motto of the United States Marines? And he'll say Semper Fidelis, okay, which means always faithful. And when you start to unpack that Pavlovian response and you look at the lengths to which the Marine Corps goes in our basic training of both our enlisted Marines and our officers of Marines, the exercises, the tests, and when I say tests, I'm talking about physical tests in the field where your leadership is tested. those core values are reinforced in every single one of those things. It becomes part of the training syllabus, part of the teaching points for that class. Every Marine recruit, as an example, when they're down at boot camp, one of the last events that they execute is called the Crucible,
Right.
aptly named in that it is a 3+ day test, physical, mental, leadership, everything of the team, your recruit platoon, where sometimes during that 3 days you will be the leader, sometimes you will be the follower, both equally important to learn how to do. But at each station that you go through, there may be some sort of a test. Well, one of the things that they do, each station is normally named after a Marine who's the recipient of the Medal of Honor or the Navy Cross or the Silver Star or something like that. Throughout history, it can be as far back as the American Revolution or as recent as Iraq and Afghanistan. And they will read the citation of that Marine. And then they will say, so this test that you're, or this event you're getting ready to do is named after this Marine. And this is what he did. And this is why it is an example of honor, courage, or commitment, or semper fidelis, or, and then you start to unpack those and you look at the other sort of inherent leadership traits and qualities that exist underneath of that, and then you learn very quickly. And so what happens then is that lesson, that name, that history, that reinforcing point is then burned into your soul as a consequence of success or failure on that event. And as you so rightly pointed out, Dave, oftentimes the leadership lessons are more pronounced in a failure to complete the event than they are in a successful completion of the event. And that's where, like I said, the Marine Corps spends just a huge amount of time with both our officers in their training and in our recruits before they become Marines, reinforcing those points, and it becomes a part of who you are. There's a great Marine Corps does really good recruiting commercials, and I saw one just this last weekend. We were watching a football game, and this Marine commercial comes up, and it rightly says, you don't join the Marines, you become one. And to become one requires honor, courage, commitment. And then they show some of the things that are going on, and they show the results, both that are very flashy and very inspiring and those sorts of things. And I think that's really important, because those core values then become your touch points. And when you're cold and tired and under stress, like anything else, the things that have been burned into your soul under tests of one kind or another tend to become the things to which you cling, and the values, the core values that you come back to that help you make better decisions. They're not always going to be perfect, but if you cling to those things and you hone those instincts by never forgetting those basics that you learned in those formative experiences. And this happens to people that are Marines, not Marines. It happens in every organization, particularly service organizations, because it's about something bigger than you.
Right.
And so when you do that, when you learn those things, you'll fall back on your training. And the training is inspired by those core values. Those core values help you make good decisions. And those are the kind of things, at least for me, that I admire in leaders. You can always trace the thread from the decision or the example they set back to one of those core values and say, I want to be like that person.
Yeah, 100%. And a couple of things that you mentioned, obviously a mutual friend of ours always talks about, when under stressful situations, he calls it going to the basement, right? But I mean, we always talk about, you're going to fall back to the level of your training, right? It doesn't matter what, hey, this sounds great, but what's muscle memory? What have I done so many times? Like you said, it's just ingrained habit now at this point. So you don't even have to think about it. And so that's the great thing about that is that the Marine Corps does put a huge thing on leadership, and it really, officer ranks, enlisted ranks, it really, really pushes that. So when it comes time, like you see, like Dan says, go to the basement, and it's okay. It'll just
those things are
react because
reinforced.
it's built into you.
Yeah, and they're reinforced. And I guess in many ways, the other thing that the Marine Corps does a really good job at is teaching its own history and really emphasizing the point that as a United States Marine, you have a sacred duty while you're standing on the shoulders of those who have gone before you to not let that reputation ever be tarnished. If there's something that stands as a shameful mark that you could not come back from, that would be it. If you let that history down, and those people who have been semper fidelis, always faithful for 249 years, 250 years this year. Marine Corps was established on November 10th, 1775. You ask any Marine, he'll be able to tell you that too. At Fun Tavern in Philadelphia, by the way. So, these are the things they say the Marine Corps is very much like a religion, as opposed to a service. And there's a lot of truth to that. They say we have our own Pope. We call him the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and he changes every 4 to 6 years. The current Pope is General Eric Smith. He and I served together in Iraq in 2004. And
when they made him the Commandant, did the smoke color change?
I think so. There's probably something like that happens at Marine Barracks in D.C. There's probably a conclave or something that happens.
One of the rings of the Pentagon, all of a sudden, there's white smoke. We've got a new Commandant. Everybody cheers.
Something like that. So, we have our own Pope. We have our own saints. All of these heroes from the history of the Marine Corps, and we know their names. Chesty Puller and Dan Daly and John Ripley and these people that are burned, and they are, guess what, the subjects of many of those events in the Crucible, or those leadership tests at the Officer Candidate School at Quantico. There are barracks named after them, streets named after them, whatever. And, invariably, if you're out with a bunch of other Marines, you learn what the legends are behind those names that are plastered all over the place or are burned into your brain as a result of one of those events or something like that. So, again, you never let that pass down. Look to the future and always build on that. And you'll go back through and you have all these wonderful little sayings that you remember from some of the greatest leaders you've ever known, some that you've read, some that you've just heard of, and you're like, wow, I want to keep that one. I'm going to hang on to that. One is, Semper Fidelis, always faithful to the core values, to what the Corps does for the country, not just while you're in uniform, but later. You have a sacred obligation after you leave the active duty Marines. You're a Marine for life. There's no such thing as a former Marine.
Trust me, tell somebody, oh, well, so-and-so used to be a Marine. It's like, get ready for it. It's coming.
Don't ever,
exactly. Step back. I step back when somebody says that. I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah, no, that's an important distinction to make. And the reason why it's important is because you don't give up or surrender your obligation to uphold the reputation of the United States Marine Corps just because you're not wearing the uniform anymore, because you're not active duty. You have that obligation till the day you leave this earth. And that's another thing that those Marine drill instructors, whether they are at a place like Paris Island, South Carolina, or San Diego, or recruit depots, or at the Officer Candidate School, or down at the basic school, or wherever, they make sure that hey, look, it's over now. I mean, there's no such thing as a form. You're it. You're done. Whether you serve for 3 years or 43 years, these are the things we expect from you.
It's on you now, boss.
Yeah, and it's and you walk away from that and you're like, wow. Oh, and then when you're sort of new in the gun club, as we'll refer for, or the big green machine, that people have told you that a lot, but you haven't really lived it yet.
Right.
But as you get older and the more you're around it, the more you see, and the more you're given opportunities to reinforce those values and to lead Marines and to really reflect on the history and the successes of the Corps and leadership inside the Corps, it becomes really a sacred obligation. And it's funny, oftentimes the guys who are most dedicated to that reputation and are most vocal about it are the guys that only serve 3 years, 3 or 4 years, one enlistment. They are. And it's not because, they feel like, but it's because they later in life, they realize what a privilege that short part of their life was. And particularly when they spend time out around folks that haven't been given the privilege of being a Marine, and they're like, wow, I really had something. I didn't know what I had when I had it. And so now it becomes even more important to them to live up to the reputation, to make sure that the reputation of the Corps isn't tarnished by anything that they do. So really very important stuff. And it all goes back to those core values. It goes back to that culture of leadership and of example and of those things that make being a leader important. Like I said, the little bumper sticker phrases, Semper Fidelis, hey, the only easy day was yesterday.
Yep.
All right. If you're not puking, you're not trying. I guess the point, the expectation is that you're always going to give more, and then you've always got more left.
Yeah.
Okay. You think you're done? You're only at 40% effort right now, fella. You think you're done? No. Are you still
haven't seen what done is?
Are you still breathing? So you're not done. Okay. No. We at Second Force Recon, I remember we used to do these things called crossovers, where it was a 25-meter wide pool, and you would be on one side of the pool, and you drop down 14 feet to the bottom of the pool. You'd swim across, and you'd come up on the other side, and that's one crossover. So you just do these all the time to get better at swimming, because we spend a lot of time in the water.
Right.
But we used to have what we called sharks down at the bottom, and while you're swimming, they would try to keep you down there and wrestle with you and all kinds of other things. And there, to include myself, there were times when you actually lost consciousness. So they would bring you up onto the pool deck, revive you, spit up the water, and you do the Bugs Bunny
again,
back in the pool. Okay, only easy day was yesterday. So there's no, you don't quit. I'm reading a great book right now by a Royal Marine, a British Royal Marine and that's the organization where the the U.S. Marine Corps traces a lot of its heritage and I think a lot of its traditions as well. And it's this magnificent Marine who, after his time on active duty, he stayed connected with the Royal Marines, had done everything to help. And while he was still on active duty, he helped train the All England soccer team, helped train the All England rugby team, different organizations that want to learn to get back to that core set of core values and that culture, establishing a culture of leadership and followership and those sorts of things. And that's where it brings me back again to my point about being a reader, learning from other people. You get to a place where, God, I've read, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leadership books and this, that, and the other, and biographies and everything else. There's not a single time that I've ever picked up a book, even if I've read it 10 times before, where I haven't learned something new, where I don't walk away with a small thing that, hey, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. Or maybe in the 10 years since I read it the first time, something has changed, which has elevated that particular thought or that particular example to a greater degree of importance for me. And so, again, back to the reader and what are good leaders like? I mean, your first question, good leaders are ones that set the example, that don't ever accept anything less than their best effort. Are you going to give less than your best effort every day? Sometimes you are. Okay. And those are the days where you look in the mirror at the end of the day and you've got to be honest with yourself and say, I'm going to do better tomorrow. And then the next day you do better. And you have the discipline to not let yourself, your fellow Marines, your fellow people in your organization down, or the people that have gone before you. So you do that. Okay. You set the example and you work hard. You give it your best shot every single day, and you help other people grow. You bring them with you. You help them. You don't. It's not beating your chest. Look at me. I'm a leader. Follow me. Okay, yeah, great. That's fine. But that's not what a leader will. People will want to follow them because that leader is taking the time to bring them along, to show respect. Respect is a two-way street. It's not just a guy standing at the front of the formation and yelling because he's in charge. Okay. Sometimes you need to be loud just so everybody can hear you, or things are of a sufficient degree of urgency that you need to move quickly. But you do much better if there is a feeling of mutual respect between the leader and the led. And if that respect is reinforced on a daily basis, you'd be surprised how quickly the led become the leader. And that's your job. Your job is to bring them up and make leaders from them. Younger generation, bring them on so that they, guess what, carry on the traditions and make the Corps better, make your organization better, make your business better, make your school better, whatever it happens to be. Your job is to do that. You do that by showing respect, and a lot of the respect is everything from taking the time to read, passing on those lessons, and then also having discussions and listening.
Absolutely.
Leaders are great listeners.
Yeah, well, a couple of things I picked up on. One, I like the fact that one of the things you say kind of parallel back to an old adage that Maxwell had was, be a river, not a reservoir. It's not all take, and not passing it along. I mean, that really doesn't, you can't multiply your effectiveness as a leader if you're not passing it on and training leaders who are themselves training other leaders and so on and so forth. That's how you multiply the effect. Also, like what he was talking about, you're talking about standing up there and tapping the chest and, hey, I'm the boss. Well, it's funny, talking about it. In his book, it talks about 5 levels of leadership. Well, that basic, and some people don't even call it leadership, but he just used it for the term, that positional leadership. Like, okay, I can stand in between you and a paycheck, so you have to listen to me. Okay, I might have to listen to you, but I'm only doing it out of obligation, not because you've earned my respect or because I think you're competent or that you know what you're doing or you built a relationship. It's just, I see the insignia on your collar and I have to because, like I said, particularly, would not want to be in the brig, or like I said, don't particularly want to be on the unemployment line or whatever the situation may be. But yeah, that doesn't necessarily make a leader just because, rank or position.
No, and leaders will reveal themselves to you over time. I think, good organizations will promote people into leadership positions. Sometimes they make mistakes, but hopefully good organizations will put people there. So I think when you come into a particular organization and there are leaders over you, I think depending upon what the organization is, you go into that with a particular degree of expectation that the people who are in leadership positions have earned those. So I think initially, you as the led need to make sure that you open your eyes and your ears and you show that person respect out of the position. But Absolutely. Then over time, they will prove to you that they're either deserving of that role or not. And on their end, that means that they have shown all of the attributes and done the work to be in that position, and you'll be able to tell very, very quickly, how authentic a particular leader is based on what he or she does with whatever they happen to be in charge of.
I agree 100%. And one of the things, and we'll wrap up this segment here soon, and we'll jump into our questions on the next segment. But a couple of things I've noticed, even especially nowadays with social media, people's BS meter is very highly attuned. And so I think somebody coming out there and just saying the right words and doing all the corporate speak, it might have worked in the past to a certain degree, but I think it just doesn't people have to listen. Okay, well, they're in that position. I don't have a choice unless I want to go somewhere else if I can. But I don't think that works as well anymore. Like I said, at some point, it's not going to take long to realize. I don't know how this guy got there. This guy's kind of a phony. He's definitely inauthentic. Like I said, corporate speak over here, but does something totally different over there. I mean, people see that hypocrisy. And I had a CEO one time when I was interviewing, he was like, some big incident happened at their plant, and they were like, well, I was on my way to go XYZ special event, and I turned around in the middle of it, come right back because I needed to be there for my people. And he said, my people were watching. I'm like, well, here's where I'm going to correct you. I said, your people are always watching.
Yeah.
I said, you're not. They weren't just watching on the big events. They're watching every day.
No, and they're going to watch you, and the things that they will remember are going to be things that you never expected. I can't tell you how many times that situation has been reinforced, where one of the things that we do in various units and things like that is we do an in-brief and an out-brief when you have leaders come in or whatever. But also, just over time, I think you run into people and folks that you've been responsible for and with, or been in units and things like that with, and you'd be surprised sometimes the stories that they have about you that you don't even remember. You don't remember because to you it was just another day and you were doing something. But during that moment, you either did something either really good or really bad that made an impression on them. And I think when you're exposed to those stories about you, it reinforces the good, and it can also remind you that precisely what you just said, that as a leader you are always going to be under someone's microscope, and they're going to be looking at you, and you don't need to be paranoid about it. You just need to know that the responsibilities of leadership are not confined to a particular day or time or whatever when you're standing in a formation and giving commands or whatever. In fact, that's probably the least amount of influence you'll ever have. The most amount of influence you will ever have is generally going to be from your example in those times when you potentially have the potential to be at your worst, but for whatever reason you end up being at your best when you're tired and cold and hungry and you haven't slept in 6 days or whatever the heck it happens to be, and you still do the right thing. And then
that's what they're going to remember.
And then 15 years later, you see that young Lance Corporal Santiago, was his name, and he says, "Hey, sir, do you remember this?" And honestly, the answer is no. I don't remember this particular instance. And he said, well, let me tell you what I saw. This is what I saw. And this is what you did. And this is why it made an impression on me. And you're like, wow. And those things, and then they become part of who you are.
Yes.
You remember how important that example is and why those core values have to become part of who you are. Not just something that you plaster on a bumper sticker and put on the wall on a plaque.
No. Now, we'll end the segment with two things. One, the first time that you ever hear that story, because I remember, just like you said, the first time somebody came up and said, do you remember blah, blah, blah from 20 years ago? And I'm like, no, why? And like I said, it had this huge impression on them. And you're like, wow, okay, the first time you hear one or two of those stories, you're right. It makes a huge impact on you. And you talk about core values. Like I said, a lot of times some of the civilian world isn't as good about this as others. But one of my big pet peeves is when the only time you see the vision, mission, and core values of a company are A, during orientation when you're going over the employee handbook, and B, when you happen to walk past the CEO's office because they happen to be on the wall. But other than being on the wall in any employee handbook, those are the only times you see them lived out. Right. So what you're saying over here and what I see you guys doing over there don't jive. And that you want to talk about blowing the trust of an organization.
And that's a leadership issue. And that's where when you're given the privilege of leading an organization, you have to go out get out of your office. In fact, most good leaders don't spend much time in their office. They're out watching and looking and listening and everything, trying to be unobtrusive, but you can't always be that way. But when you see something that is contrary to those values, or there's a number of ways you can handle it. If it's a safety issue or an integrity issue, you take care of it on the spot.
100%.
If it's not, then what you do is you dig a little deeper, you become curious about it, and then you find why the decisions were made the way they were and how they manifested themselves in a negative way. And then you find out, okay, you get to where the crux of the issue really is. And you do that by asking questions and by listening. I think you and I talked before, one of my favorite things to do is the 5 whys.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got my lean facilitator, 100-hour, whatever, hundreds of hours of training. Yeah, love lean in general, but I love the 5 whys.
Yeah, you after you say why 5 times, eventually you finally get to probably where the truth is. And that's when you can zero in on it a little bit and have an honest conversation about the people involved in whatever the situation was and say, okay, why did we make these decisions? Why did you do that? Or why? And then how do we get better at this? Do you see how this is anathema or contrary to the core values that we have as a company? Or maybe what that does is you need to reevaluate, are your core values really, are they the right ones? Are they not being followed because it's not something that people can relate to on a daily basis every single day?
Right.
So, and that's the art of leadership.
Yes. Like I said, having that authenticity, transparency, and that congruency between what I say and what I do is crucial. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and end this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and we will be back with Giles, and we'll start into our first 2 questions. See you in a bit. Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are here with special guest Giles Kyser, and we are going to jump headlong into our first question. So what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Always loaded questions.
Of course. Can't be easy.
No, but they're always good questions, and they're easy to oversimplify, but also easy to make too complicated. I think that leadership to me is the ability to inspire people to go beyond what they would consider to be comfortable and do so for the right reasons. I think we all exist inside of our comfort zones. And if you spend your entire life inside that box and you don't stretch yourself, you never grow. Leaders help people grow. And the only way you're ever going to grow, whether you're growing a muscle or growing your brain or growing your capabilities as an individual, is to get beyond that comfort zone, to stretch yourself. And sometimes that means a little bit of pain. Okay, it can be intellectual pain, it can be physical pain, it can be a combination of the two, or it can just be moral pain in that, and you find yourself presented with difficult decisions that you have to make, or sometimes you're making the best worst decision.
I know. Okay. I love that phrase.
No, it's hard, and it is. But if you can keep a hold of your core values and set a good example, even in the midst of those things, that's what good leadership looks like to me. People who are willing to stand up in situations where most people would not, and move forward and get something done, even if it means at the sacrifice of their own existence, whether that existence is physical on this earth or in a business or in a social or political situation or whatever, that they are so wed and so convinced. And that's probably the bad way to say it, but they are so dedicated. That's a better way to look at it, to those guideposts, to that moral compass, to those values, those core values that we talked about earlier, that they know that if they don't act in a particular way, they will be violating that, and that is not something that they're going to be able to live with when they look in the mirror. More importantly, it's not something, it's going to hurt those that they are charged with leading. Okay, and that they've been given the privilege of leading. So to me, that's what good leadership looks like. People that I know, no matter what the circumstances are, they are going to find a way to succeed. They will find a way. Sometimes it's going to be ugly, okay, but they'll find a way to succeed. They're never going to quit. They're always going to find a way to succeed. And oh, by the way, they're going to bring me with them when they do.
Yeah,
and they're going to make me better in the process. And you may not figure it out right when you're in the midst of whatever it is that you're doing, but you're going to be better because of it, because they're going to bring you along with them outside of your comfort zone and help you grow.
Yeah.
And that's
determination, tenacity, stubborn and stick-to-itiveness. All those things. Like I said,
they live up to that example. I mean, in the Marines, we have a thing in whether you're being promoted to the grade of corporal or lance corporal or general. The first line in any promotion warrant is always the same. It says, "Know ye that reposing special trust and confidence in the fidelity, valor, honor, and abilities of Dave Miles, we do appoint him a corporal, major, general in the United States Marines to rank as such from the first day of whatever to whenever." Okay, but that special trust and confidence thing is incredibly important, and people who exhibit or provide an example that they have taken that on, that special trust and confidence of being a leader in an organization, it's incredibly important. In the oldest post of the Marine Corps is at Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C., and in what's referred to as Center House, which is the place where the sort of the officers' club is the only closed mess left in the entire United States military.
Huh.
Literally carved into a plaque when you walk into the foyer is a saying, and it says, get it right, "The special trust and confidence which is expressly reposed in each officer by their commission is the distinguishing privilege of the officer corps. It is the policy of the Marine Corps that this privilege be tangible and real. It is the corresponding obligation of the officer corps that it be wholly deserved." 3 very short sentences that carry just an amazing weight with them.
Yeah.
So when I think of leaders, I think of people that exhibit special trust and confidence.
Well, I like the fact that you talk about it being, and you talked about even in the last segment, you've got your heroes, you got the traditions, but all of that makes it, I don't want to let down the court, it all makes it's bigger than me.
Yes.
I have these people that are in my charge that depend on me to do the right thing. I don't want to let down the organization, and like I said, it's not about me. It's a lot bigger than just one person. And so putting all that together, being able to take that type of culture and translate that into a civilian organization, like I said, it just reaps huge benefits. And most of the really successful ones, it is part of their culture. But there's unfortunately way too many of them that aren't.
And you got to remind yourself of those things every day. You're not going to be at your best every day. In fact, I will tell you that I fail at something every single day, one way or the other. The difference being that I want to try to get better every day, and I want to live up to the special trust and confidence that has been given me by the organization that I'm a part of, whether I'm still a part of it, active duty or not. Like I said, no such thing as a former Marine. That special trust and confidence lives with me until the day I leave this earth. And so when I don't live up to that, it's disappointing to me, and so I got to work every day to try to live up to that. And that's tough. You got 250 years of guys that have gone before you, my popes and my saints and all these guys that, and I'm like, wow, what would Colonel Ripley think of me right now? He wouldn't think much of me. He'd say, like, get up, let's go, stop half stepping.
Yeah, I'd probably take a chewing right now, and then all right, now let's get back to it.
There you go. There you go.
That's about the extent of it. So, something I meant to ask in the last segment before we go on to the next question is: so, tell me a little bit about, you were talking about your kind of final command when you were there and you were down at with the Secretary of the Navy and whatever. Tell me a little bit more about kind of what you were doing, because I know you mentioned special warfare before and Force Recon, and then but yeah, kind of like on the end, and then tell us a little bit about that, and I have one other question about something that you mentioned in your intro.
Sure. My last tour in the Pentagon consisted of two assignments. The first assignment is I was the senior military advisor to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict. So he was basically the civilian secretary for all U.S. Special Operations Forces.
Wow.
Really just talk about a leader. And he surrounded himself with incredible experts that served as the principal deputy and the undersecretaries for these various or the deputy assistant secretaries for these various things that we were involved, combating terrorism and counter narcotics and intel, all kinds of things. That was the first job. The second job was the chief of staff for the deputy undersecretary of the Navy. His portfolio included the Naval Special Warfare Branch, the Navy SEALs, the Marine Special Operations Command. There are a number of other types of things that the Department of the Navy is involved in that spend a lot of time in that world. And then he also had international policy and intel and some other things. So it was an umbrella for a lot of those organizational things inside the Secretary of the Navy staff. So the civilian side of leadership for both the Special Operations Forces in the United States and then the Department of the Navy, which includes the Navy and the Marine Corps. So it was an interesting place to be as a uniformed person, because these are civilian leaders. We tout very, very vociferously inside the United States that the military is not led by folks wearing uniforms. It's led by civilians. They were put there. They are our civilian masters, as it should be. But it's an interesting place to see where those two cultures come together. And there are friction points, but then there are also great opportunities to watch both military and civilian leaders find a way forward.
Nice.
To the best advantage of the U.S. Special Operations Command and all of the forces that they're in charge of, and the Department of the Navy in charge of both the Navy and the Marine Corps. And then to watch them interact, by the way, with the Department of the Army, the Department of the Air Force, the other civilian agencies, the CIA, the DEA, all of these different things. So it's a great leadership laboratory for anyone, but particularly a military officer who gets to, in real time, watch how those cultures come together, sometimes clash, but also come together and work to accomplish something, which is really quite interesting.
Nice. Well, and one of the things that I've had a little bit of exposure to, but it's with it's seems to be a completely different context and atmosphere when you're talking about specialty teams. And it doesn't, military or civilian, where you're talking about special operations, where you're talking about, the civilian end of it. It could be a fire department, hazmat team or heavy tactical rescue team or a SWAT team for a police department. But, it seems like just different caliber of folks sometimes on the specialty teams than on some of the regular folks doing their thing. Like I said, it's, nothing bad about the one, but it just takes almost like it takes a special breed to be in those specialty teams.
Yeah, you want to have organizations within yours. You want to have opportunities for people to excel. There are always going to be people who want to do more, who want to be the very best at what they do. And that's why those specialty organizations exist. And Some people are cut out for that. Some people are not. And that's fine, because you need every single person within that organization to make the whole thing work. But giving a place for growth for people is just so important for any organization. Any organization. I remember when one of the neatest things I got to do was actually when I was on the Marine staff. This was before my first tour to the Pentagon, from 2000 to 2003. After 9/11, the Marine Corps, as an institution, made the decision to commit forces permanently to the U.S. Special Operations Command. And to many people, it's a surprise that they weren't always part of that. They weren't. In 1986, when the Special Operations Command was formed, it permanently anyway, the Marine Corps had chosen at that point as an institution to not commit forces permanently.
Interesting.
So you had an Air Force Special Operations Command, Naval Special Warfare Command, SEALs, and then you had the U.S. Army Special Ops Command, which included Rangers, Green Berets, and a number of other organizations to include aviation and support and all kinds of things. Well, the Marine Corps made a conscious decision back then not to become part of it. That's worthy of an entirely different podcast and discussion about how that evolved. But the point was that when the decision was taken, it was taken by the commandant, my Pope, that he was going to commit forces. And I remember having the conversation specifically with him and saying, sir, the Marine Corps has always considered itself an elite organization. We believe to our soul that we're tougher on people. We operate to a higher standard. We have higher expectations of each other and for the organization to always succeed. We make Marines and we win battles. That's what we do, period. And we will not fail, period. End of story. Full stop. So I remember having the discussion with the commandant and saying, sir, that Marines believe that we're already elite. We don't need to create another tier of
the elite of the elite.
Like even within the Marine Corps, we had that. We had our reconnaissance and force reconnaissance units and special units that did different things.
Yeah.
And he very specifically said, that's a red herring, that argument. There are always and have always been elites within elites. And that's a healthy thing, because you always want something to which you can aspire to get better and better and better. I mean, that's how professional sports works. That's how great fire departments work. That's how great SWAT teams work. When you think of SWAT teams, you immediately think of who is the best SWAT team on the planet. Well, probably the one that gets used the most often and has the greatest learns and then operates in the most difficult circumstances or whatever. Yep. Well, that sounds very similar to Special Operations Forces or a hazmat unit or whatever it happens to be. So you want the best people. You want people that live for that challenge, that take that and eat that up and want more. Because at the end of the day, their willingness to go the extra mile and be the very best at what they do, if you've got a good organization, is going to translate into a higher level of mission success. And that means that you're going to save more people, or you're going to accomplish the mission to a better degree and a greater degree than another unit would have done. And if you're really good, you develop a culture that continues to build on that. So that 20 years from now, the guys that were part of the organization when you were part of it, and 20 years later, they come and they go, wow, there's no way I could do what these guys do today. They're that much better than we were. They've got better. It's not just the technology. They're just better. They're more physically fit. They're smarter. They can put things together more quickly. They do stuff that we never even considered doing because they never stopped learning and evolving.
Well, like you said, you're building on top of each other.
They grow people. They grow organizations. They do it through that example every day of never quitting, of always wanting to be better, honor, courage, commitment, those things. All that. To honor the people who have gone before you, you get better.
Yep.
You don't maintain the status quo, you get better.
No, I haven't seen a whole lot of status quo and good enough is good enough people on specialty teams, no matter where they're at. Typically, like I said, you got your, you know, take rank part out of it, but let's say you've got your high achievers and your ones that really want to, do their best work. I said most of those are the folks that end up migrating to those specialty teams. Like I said, it'll be okay, or it's close enough. You don't find a lot of those people on.
And the interesting part is when they do get to those other organizations, they go, "Wow, I thought I was pretty decent. I am a absolute amateur in comparison to all these guys around me right now. It's like you're thrown into the deep end of the pool and they throw you an anvil. So then they tell you to start swimming. And you thought you were pretty good right up until then, and then you figure out, hey, guess what? Yeah, you're not in Kansas anymore.
No, it's when they peel back the curtain, it's that next step up. Realize. I mean,
and some people will see that and they'll fold like a lawn chair. Other people will see that as a challenge, and they will absolutely rise to the challenge and then they inspire you. You're like, okay, that's the guy I want. I want the guy that'll never quit, not the guy that's it's easy for. Any guy that comes into an organization like that and can immediately do all the things that they do, that's great. But is that really the guy you want, or do you want the guy who fails and keeps chewing?
Yeah, well, it's just a barrier to entry. Like I said, you got, I'm all this, I'm great, I'm whatever. Well, no, that's just your entry ticket to get in the door, right? Then the fun begins.
There you go. Absolutely, you're 100% right.
That's where the fun begins. Well, how about this? Jump on the second question. So, what was one of the biggest leadership challenges you've had to face?
Wow. I think
not a loaded question.
I mean, there's been many, but I would say the requirement to maintain a level of performance over an extended period of time, during which people's lives literally depended on the decisions that you took, and then having to face the consequences of those decisions, good and bad, and then pick apart those steps you took or didn't take that resulted in that happening. And it can be applied in so many different ways throughout my entire time, both in business and in the Marines. But the time that I think was my greatest crucible was commanding a battalion task force in Iraq in 2004. Over the 8+ months that we were there, the battalion had 650 separate engagements. We had 165 of my magnificent Marines and sailors wounded, 6 of whom did not come home. And I will tell you that the 6 that did not come home, that's very personal for me. The number of times, thousands of times, that I look back on that time period and wonder, what could I have done better that potentially might have avoided the casualties as well as the deaths, and picking apart my decisions, picking apart those times when I'll be honest, I looked at myself and I'm like, okay, that was a day where you weren't at your best, or, nobody cares that you hadn't slept in 3 days. You made a bad decision. And maybe you made a bad decision because you didn't sleep for 3 days. And you didn't sleep for 3 days because maybe you should have taken a break, handed something over to the XO, but you were so focused on it, you didn't want to give up because you couldn't see the end state of becoming too tired to make good decisions. Or you get out and you're going along and it looks good, and you make an assumption that something's going to happen and it doesn't. They say in the Marine Corps there are troop leading steps, and the last troop leading step is what we call supervision. It's BAMCIS. The acronym is BAMCIS. Bravo, Alpha, Mike, Charlie, India, Sierra. It's begin planning, arrange for and make your reconnaissance, complete the plan, issue the order, and supervise. The last thing is supervise. And that doesn't mean that you over supervise or micromanage, but you have to, as a leader, be able to still ensure that something is being done to the standard you expect, while not being obtrusive and taking over the other person's job or anything else like that. And when you fail to do that, bad things can happen. Sometimes you get lucky and bad things don't happen. Sometimes you're not lucky and bad things do happen. And then it's a cascading effect of consequences which lead either potentially to other bad decisions or other situations that people are hurt or killed or whatever. And so to me, the biggest leadership challenge is one of my biggest leadership challenges was coming to grips with that, not only at the time, but since. Learning to be honest with yourself about your shortcomings, and then learning to be honest about how you overcome those, and then having the discipline to actually come up with a plan on how you're going to overcome them and do it. Because to not do that, guess what you're doing? You're letting down 250 years of people who have gone before you, and you are dishonoring those who didn't come home. Because to not take action and to not become better means it's not that they died in vain, because they didn't. The honor of what they did stands without any help from me or anybody else. But if you want it to be worthwhile, then you take not just the act of their sacrifice, but where you could have been better as a leader. And that becomes how, as a leader, you honor that sacrifice that they gave. So I guess, toughest leadership challenge almost always are internal. I think. Externally, I think if you focus and focus on your core values, you're going to know the right thing. And if you've honed your instincts through learning and reading and having that kind of honest conversation with yourself, you're going to make good decisions on the spot when you're presented with a situation. It's the introspection that takes place afterward, and the willingness to do that, not being intellectually or morally lazy.
I like that.
That is, I think, probably the greatest challenge any leader will have. And that's where, whether you look at the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, the leader of a corporation, whatever it is, and they look at, you look at Kodak film, doesn't exist anymore. Used to be one of the biggest companies in the world. Okay, yep. You look at the downfall of Kodak and why did they end up where they were? Yet they still had a CEO who loved Kodak and believed in his company and everything else like that. But I think if that person were to look in the mirror and be intellectually honest and not more intellectually lazy or morally lazy, he would have been able to point back to those places where he took decisions that were short-sighted. Well, okay, back to the 5 whys. Why was it short-sighted? Why did you make that decision? Well, this, and this. Well, why was that important, and why didn't you think forward? Again, ask the 5 whys. And that's what I mean about not being intellectually lazy or morally lazy. You got to be able to have that honest conversation with yourself. And really good leaders create conditions where you can have that honest conversation with those that you lead or with those that are leading you. And have those conversations, and that brings that trust back. Special trust and confidence. There we go again.
100%. A couple things that I really like about the culture is being able to there's a lot of organizations that don't do after actions or hot washes or things like that. That debriefing process to go back, what went well, what could we have done better. And like I said, if anything that maybe not necessarily call it a failure, but it's something doesn't turn out exactly how you had planned or expected, use the term failure for lack of a better term. If you look at every one of those as a lesson, if you don't extract the lesson from the failure, then that's where it becomes a waste. If you can extract the lesson out of that, like you said, and get better, then it's like, okay, well, you back 3 steps and forward 8. It's kind of okay, well, we learned something from this, and now we know how to get better and what to do and what not to do. And I think that's, you were talking about kind of standing on the shoulders of the ones that came before, and a unit or a team or an organization getting better and better and better, where, hey, there's no way we could have done this 20 years ago. I think those hot washes, after actions, lessons learned, put into place, I think that's how you constantly get better, through iteration and
good
doing
organizations do
that process.
Good organizations do that. One of the best books I've ever read was actually written by the general manager of the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. And the book is called Legacy. And one of the distinguishing hallmarks of those teams is how brutally honest they are with each other when something doesn't go well. And when I say brutally honest, they're not mean to each other.
Right.
But somebody misses, a pitch, they do a pass to someone,
right,
and it's off by 6 inches or 12 inches, or it's low or it's high or whatever it happens to be, and that creates a situation that's less than optimal. The guy who received the pass doesn't say, well, you sent me, what's the matter with you, 6 inches below where it should have been. It's like, okay, what can I do to help you get better, or what can I do so that I'm not out of position when you pitch the ball? Right. It's a collaborative effort of getting better, and it's absolutely, because it has nothing to do with the individuals. It has to do with performing better as a team.
Correct.
And if you focus on that, it's amazing how, if you leave the egos at the door, you'd be surprised how much you can actually accomplish. One of the great example from the All Blacks is there's a culture of leadership and servant leadership, which is, I think, is an overused phrase. Not a lot of people talk about it. Not a lot of people do it. At the conclusion of every test, which is what they call a game for rugby, the All Blacks locker room. Can you imagine what that looks like? I mean, there's tape and there's bloody this and stuff laying around, and I mean, it's just this awful, just horrible place. There are not janitors to clean the All Blacks locker room. And the team doesn't clean it either. The captain of the team cleans it.
Wow.
After every test, he cleans the locker room and returns it to its pristine state before he leaves the stadium. Some people would say, okay, that's a fairly trite example. And wow, that's really nice, but does that really mean anything? Well, I don't know. Can you imagine Tom Brady cleaning the New England Patriots locker room after the Super Bowl?
Well, you mentioned about some people might think it's a trite example, but
I don't like Tom Brady. He's a great leader.
Yeah. Nothing
against a very different culture.
Correct. But I love that, because you're talking about putting yourself in a situation to where I'm not going to ask anybody to do anything that I'm not willing to do myself, and have done, and you've seen me do it. So it's not like
establishing. I like to refer to that as establishing moral authority.
Yes.
And as a leader, you have to have moral authority. And that means sometimes when you're a lieutenant colonel in charge of an entire battalion task force of 1,100 Marines, sometimes you're the first guy through the door. Sometimes you're the guy kicking the door in. Not because you need to be the guy kicking the door in, But because you're going to ask Lance Corporal Miles to kick the next door in, he has to know that you're willing to do it. And sometimes when nobody else is willing to do it, that's when the leader steps up and says, follow me. And so that establishes that moral authority, whether that moral authority is established by cleaning the locker room or by making sure that your turnout gear is perfect every single day before you leave the firehouse.
Yep.
Making sure that the engine has been inspected from nose to tail. Maybe you weren't the one who cleaned it, but I bet you know how. And I bet you're going to check on it and you're going to make sure it's right. And if it's not right, you're going to bring the person who was supposed to do it and you're going to do it together until it is right. Moral authority is established by example.
Yes.
By technical and tactical proficiency, by study, by all of those things that come together to create leadership.
Yes. Like I said, are you competent? Like I said, do you know what you're talking about? You don't have to be the best, the most technically proficient expert in whatever, but you have to be competent. They have to know that you're competent in what you're doing for them to trust you. And you were talking about kicking in the door. I'm having a total brain fart, and I'm not willing to go grab the phone to look it up. But the Mel Gibson movie where in Vietnam, where he was always the first one off the chopper and the last one on.
We Were Soldiers Once and Young. Okay, that was the movie, and it's after a book. It was written. The movie was adapted from a book that was written by retired Army, now passed away, unfortunately, Lieutenant General Hal Moore. And again, one of these serendipitous things. When I was a young captain, I was down at the Army School for Captains as one of 3 Marines that they send down there every year to learn in their course. And that was when the book actually was released. And General Moore and his co-author, Joe Galloway, who was the reporter that was with him, and 50 or more of those soldiers who fought at the Battle of LZ X-Ray came to Fort Benning to talk about the book and pass on their experiences and everything else like that. And the movie did a great job of bringing to the screen the kind of leadership Hal Moore lived every day. And it comes out not just in the books, but it comes out from things that you hear, the quotes that you hear from his soldiers, the quotes that you heard from Galloway, the reporter, watching him and then having a chance to meet not only General Moore, but also Sergeant Major Plumley, who was played by Sam Elliott in the movie. Really nicely, but meeting these larger than life characters and having a chance to just be in the same room with them, you realize how lucky you are, privileged you are to be around them. But then you also realize how incredibly humble they are. Okay, and how they live a life of leadership through competence and moral authority established through years and years and years of doing the right thing every day, and becomes who they are, a habit, and that translates to all of those people around them. And he was right. I will always be the first one on the battlefield, and I will always be the last one off.
Like I said, that says a lot to your people that are in your charge. I mean, it's like I said, it could be, pastor of a mega church cleaning, catch them on a Thursday afternoon cleaning the toilets in the bathroom. Or like I said, the first one off the chopper, or the lieutenant colonel kicking the door in. It doesn't matter. If you're the
cleaning the locker room,
the captain cleaning the locker room. Like I said, I love the idea of how you talk about that, setting up that moral authority, because they're going to follow you because they see what you do. And I was trying to find some better words for it, but I love what you were talking about servant leadership. First thing that came to my mind when you mentioned what you did about it was kind of, over discussed and underperformed. You remember talking about? Yeah,
it is. I mean, it's a wonderful bumper sticker, but it's amazing that if you actually think of your role as a leader, as serving those who are around you. Now, how does that service translate? Okay. Sometimes serving them is making sure they're going to stay alive. And sometimes making sure they're going to stay alive means you have to be the biggest draconian you know what when it comes to establishing a standard, let's say, for, I don't know, how you wear your personal protective equipment. Okay, guess what? You are going to wear the neck protector when you're out. Yeah, it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me too. And I wear mine, and you're bloody well going to wear yours. And when I find you not wearing yours, I'm going to correct you immediately. And then I'm going to go find everybody in your chain of command, and I'm going to talk to them and ask them why, one of my 5 whys, why Lance Corporal Miles decided that today he wasn't going to wear his neck protector. Is there something that did I not make myself clear? Or do you not believe that it's important? Do you not believe that they work? And oh, by the way, about 5 days later, that young Marine came up to me at the very forceful insistence of his company first sergeant. And he brought with him the shredded neck protector.
Ooh.
Because his vehicle had been hit with an IED, and a piece of shrapnel hit his neck protector and embedded itself right where his jugular vein was. He had a little nick there, but it didn't go through and slice his jugular vein and kill him.
Which it would have if he didn't have his neck protector on.
So, again, one of those stories that you don't realize what you're doing is important until maybe sometime later. And that's one of the ones that sticks in my brain about how important it is to have a standard and enforce the standard by your example. And oh, by the way, then not being morally lazy. And when you see a Marine walking by and he doesn't have it, and you're getting ready to go out of the forward operating base on a patrol and he doesn't have his neck protector strapped. So you turn into a flaming dragon. And
the flaming dragon because you want them to go home at the end of the day.
And in the course of that conversation, you know what? You tell him, Lance Corporal Miles, you can complain about me when you're 90 years old and sitting on your porch in a rocking chair.
Yeah, my job is to get you end of your hospital retirement.
You can talk about what a big pain in the neck I was, literally and figuratively, I guess. And what a jerk I was and how mean I was to you. But then hopefully at the end of that, you can remember that one of the reasons why you can have that conversation with your grandchildren is because I was a mean jerk.
And you're still here.
You wear the stuff you were supposed to wear. Lots of stories, a lot of different things out there, but usually moral authority. Okay. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I know we had this issue a lot of times in the fire department. I guess years ago, people led the same way on the fire ground as they did in the, or they took how they led on the fire ground, took it back to the station. Like I said, the draconian kind of authoritarian, just, do it because of X, where, in one aspect, okay, if you don't listen and you don't listen right away, you may not go home tomorrow morning. Right. Versus something routine around the station may not be to the same level of criticality to deserve that level of like I said, a difference between, hey, make sure all your PPE is on before you go out versus the hey, you're shooting, whatever trivial thing that's out there. But yeah, it's you kind of learn it when you're working with that team that how you deal with folks at the station was a little bit different than how you dealt when the bell went off.
Well, and the thing of it is, though, is and I will tell you this, and this is where the level of discipline that you require in the field is a consequence of your training and all of that. And sometimes when you're back in the rear, when you're doing the training, that's the time for questions. That's the time to explain why the decision is taken the way it does, or what led to the decision or whatever. However, that does not relieve anyone in the organization from having the self-discipline to complete whatever task they're given to the very best level it can be completed. I love movies, because there's leadership lessons in so many. I was actually watching one last evening. My wife was out, so I was watching one called The Last Samurai. I don't know whether you've seen it, but Tom Cruise is in it, and he plays an American cavalry officer who is captured by a samurai in Japan in the 1800s, and then he is basically up in the mountains in this Japanese village that is ruled and led by this samurai throughout an entire fall and winter and spring, and then when the snows melt, he comes back and everything else like that. But in the course of his time with them, one of the greatest lines I remember him saying was, "Watching these people, I have never seen such discipline. They devote themselves to perfection in whatever task they are performing." And then they show various scenes. They show somebody writing, okay, and with these perfect strokes of this pen. They show another guy, firing his bow with just this wonderfully graceful motion that clearly is the result of hundreds of thousands of hours of doing that motion, or of wielding their swords and practicing, or doing hand-to-hand combat, or pouring a cup of tea, or putting hot water into, but doing it and laying the ladle down. And I think, again, that comes back to what kind of an organization do you want to be part of? Do you want to be part of an organization where, guess what? Everybody laces their shoes left over right, period, done, end of story, and it's always the same? Are you going to be part of an organization where everybody's turnout gear is hung up the exact same way, everything's in the same place, so that it can be inspected in 5 seconds by somebody with a practiced eye? Or they're just going to hang it up there and see how it goes. Just throw it in the locker and hope for the best. When's the last time that somebody actually looked at all the OBAs? How many of them have been checked? How many of the various face shields have been cleaned properly so you'll be able to see out of it? Okay. When was is the dial on the O2? Is it clear? When's the last time it was checked? When was it calibrated last? Okay. All of those little teeny tiny things. Okay. Cleaning the fire engine has nothing to do with the fire engine being clean, does it? It has everything to do with making sure that it's functional, and you find out if there's anything on the engine that is not going to function in the way it's supposed to when you need it to.
It'll still start.
Okay.
It'll still get out the door. It'll still flow water. But there's something about not just the stem to stern, front to back, top to bottom check.
How many times have you inspected the O-ring? Is the O-ring still working?
Yep.
Is it brittle? If you haven't cleaned it, how do you know?
What's amazing it's amazing how much, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's amazing how you have, quote, the normal check off procedural type thing. Like I said, people get used to doing it, but how much extra you end up picking up from that level of detail of, okay, grab the mop bucket and the scrub brushes, right? It's time to wash this thing. And as you're going through and finish washing and detailing, whatever, how many little things that you wouldn't have picked up on, whether it's a maintenance issue, mechanical issue, safety issue, seatbelt, doesn't matter. You wouldn't have picked up on if you hadn't have done that detail.
Or if one of the people in your charge, because of the example you set of I've always wanted to do something a little bit better than it was done yesterday. That young fireman or whomever it is just did something where the standard you've always set is right here. He just bumped it up here. Now you're a leader. So how do you take that? You're like, holy crap, he just made me look bad. Or do you say, wow, now we're all going to get better. And if the good leader will say, well, and he'll recognize that person for doing a better job that day and making the entire organization better to include me, because I hadn't thought of that, and that's great. That's great. Guess what? We're all doing it that way now. Okay? Check your stuff, learn. We're all doing it his way because he just raised the bar.
Absolutely. Learn from everybody. And one thing that since you were talking about the 5 whys and it's kind of mutual love of the lean process, and then we'll wrap up and get to our last questions at the next segment is I love the lean principle that the people closest to the work know best how to improve it, right? That's just and they can always make it better. And they know more about it than you 6 levels up.
And that's why one of the things that we harp on constantly in the Marines, particularly when you're putting together orders for battle or whatever, is as the person who is developing the commander is developing the plan. You give what's referred to as your commander's intent, which is purpose, method, and end state. Okay, the purpose is why are we doing what we are doing? And how does that relate to everyone around us? And how are we contributing to the overall mission of the unit that we're a part of? We're part of the higher unit too. Oh, by the way, and our job is to help them be successful. So what is our purpose? Why are we doing what we're doing? The method, okay, we're going to do this by using this particular tactical formation, and this is how we're generally going to execute. And then the end state is, at the end of all of this, we will have achieved. This is what success is going to look like. Now, the most important 2 pieces of that are the why and the end state. The sausage making that goes on in the middle during the method part, if you've developed good organization and they feel empowered to do the right thing because you've helped them train, and guess what? They're going to know better on the spot how to do the best thing to get to that end state and to help you achieve the why. They have to feel empowered to change some of that sausage making to reach that, and you got to trust them to do it. Okay? And you have to have made the order and the plan flexible enough that will allow them to do those things. And they have to be thinking. So you develop thinking leaders to know that, okay, if I change some of the method to reach the end state, how is that going to affect the people on my right and my left? And do I coordinate with them, even if I can't talk to my higher? All of those little things that go into it. The commander's intent, the end state, the why. That's your job and to then empower them and trust them, the guy at the pointy end of the spear who knows that, guess what? I know the boss said, we're going to do a right flank, but right flank ain't looking so hot right now. There's some things that have happened over here that, so we're going to exploit this. We're still going to create the end state that he wants to achieve, but I'm going to do it a little differently. And I know he trusts me to do that because he helped me up to this point to get better. And we're going to work together on that. So that's incredibly important. You've got to empower them to do that. You have to train them to be able to think that way. And you got to give them the tools to do it. And you need to encourage that. They have to have the temerity to step forward and do that.
100%. And one of the things is we wrap up this segment and then we'll come back for our last 2 questions. I love the idea of the commander's intent that sometimes you don't get necessarily in the civilian world, because having the why and what's the end state, a lot of people can tough out a lot of stuff if they know the why and they know what it's supposed to look like at the end. That really, you can go through a lot of stuff in between those two if you know here's why we're doing it and here's what the goal is at the end, and this is what it's supposed to look like and what we're trying to accomplish.
And there's a balance in there too, Dave, because if you're flying an airplane, you don't want a whole lot of deviation from some of the checklists in here, because that could get real sporty in a real hurry. But sometimes you do have to deviate, and deviation, as long as it gets you to the thing, helps you get the why, doesn't reduce the effectiveness of the other organizations around you. It's incredibly important. That's the leader's job. That's the art of leading in a difficult situation where you've got to do things like that.
100%. And that tees me up perfect for the next question. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We will be back in just a moment for our final 2 questions and wrap up. Welcome back to our third and final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. And so we're here with Giles Kyser, and we're going to jump into our last 2 questions. So next question is, what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
Tough question, because you can dissect so many different things. I think probably not listening. And that manifests itself in so many different ways. I think leaders in particular, particularly after a while, and I'm guilty of this like anybody else, is you like hearing yourself talk, so to speak. I mean, you've got these things, you want to get them across, and you become a bulldozer. You become the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So you have to develop a way to not be the 800-pound gorilla. One of the best ways I ever saw this done, and then I used it myself, I would use it in staff meetings or when I was giving an order, or whether that was in business or as a battalion commander or company commander or whatever, is when I finished my portion of providing the order, and then it's time to go through the questions and all the rest of those things, you have to physically start. You designate, start with the most inexperienced or the most junior person in the room. Okay, and you say, okay, do you have any questions? Is everything clear to you? And so, okay, well, because that junior person doesn't want to look like, a buffoon or whatever the heck else it is, because they feel I don't have the experience to even answer this question. Then you force them to, and what I used to call a brief back. So I'd say, okay, Second Lieutenant Miles, what are you going to do on the operation? Brief me back. What did I just tell you? What's the purpose? What's the method? What's the end state? What are the key points? What are your mission essential tasks? What are it? Brief me back. Okay, or so you're clear on X. You're sure. Okay, so if you're clear on it, how are you going to do it? Start with the most junior guy in the room. The most junior guy. Why? Because you have to reinforce the importance of his role, his or her role, and then also create and inculcate within them the temerity to ask questions and to stand on their own 2 feet. Incredibly important to do that, and then work your way up to the most senior people. And if the most junior person in the room asks what's probably not a great question or reveals the fact that either they weren't paying attention or they really don't understand things, that is not the time to come down on it. Okay? The old, praise in public and reprimand in private. I'm not even saying you reprimand it. That's a teachable moment. That's the time when you say, okay, let's figure this out together. Let's get.
No, and I like what you mentioned that, because it could literally go both ways. Were they not paying attention, or was I not as clear as I needed to be in articulating what we needed to do? It could literally be either one.
It could be one or the other. And guess what? As a leader, it's your job to figure that out. I remember I always used to say, look, if you walk out of here and you're not clear on something, that's your fault. I says, it's my fault if I didn't make it clear to you. But if you walk out of here and there's a question in your mind and you haven't asked it, that's on you.
Yep.
Okay. And then you got to follow through. And guess what? Sometimes they're going to ask questions that are going to make everybody in that room uncomfortable. One of the best things I ever saw. It's not the night before, but the day before we are getting ready to attack into Kuwait in Desert Storm.
Right.
And we had the Marines were coming up from the south, and we had all these. We're going to have to blow breach lanes through the Iraqi defenses, through the minefields. We expected to get gassed. All of these things, this, that, and the other. So we're going, and there's this huge. I mean, it's huge. It's probably 50 feet wide by 50 feet deep. A sand table that has been put on the ground. There are grid lines on it that have been put in with wire and stuff, so you can see, and all the unit symbols are there, so everybody can see where they're going to be. The terrain is all correct, so we know where the hills and the berms are going to be, and where the oil wells. All that stuff's on there, and then it shows where the breach line, and we call it a rock drill. So this unit commander sharing, you say, okay, we're going to be here, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and this, that, and the other. And you go through the whole thing step by step. I mean, we're talking general officers, colonels, lieutenant colonels, I mean, unit commanders out there doing this thing. But guess what? There are also second lieutenants in the room because they're watching it, because that's part of this, is to watch it all happen and get a context. Yep. So we get to the end of this thing, and the colonel, who is DG3, the operations officer for the entire 2nd Marine Division, incredibly experienced guy, Vietnam veteran, been in combat, all kinds. He's the guy who would come up with a plan with the general's help, and this is what we're going to do. There's a 2nd lieutenant. They'll say, sir, I think you're wrong here. I don't understand why we're doing this, or this doesn't make sense to me. And you could feel the tension in the room just go, oh my gosh.
Everyone's like, shut up.
Yeah, oh my God. And you could see, and it was, and watching this, I mean, even me, I'm like, holy crap, the 2nd lieutenant is asking this question. And, it was clear to me, I got it, but he's asking this question. And so even the guys around him kind of took a step back, because they don't want to be in the casualty radius of the blast this guy's getting ready to get from this grizzled old colonel. To the colonel's credit and to the general's credit, they said, well, what do you mean? And so the lieutenant explained his concern. And so the colonel tried saying, well, no, it's this and it's that, and da-da-da-da-da. The second time, the lieutenant says, sir, I understand what you're saying, but it's still that still doesn't make sense to me, because I think this is going to happen if you do that. Right here, at this spot, when you do what you just said, this is going to get, and we're not going to be able, it's going to get confused. And so now the colonel's, he's starting to get a little frustrated. So finally the colonel, like, no, damn it, this and pump it up and up and up and up and up and up. And the lieutenant, third time now, he goes, I'm sorry, but that still looks to me like we're getting ready to do it. And so the colonel at this time, at this point, he's the third time, the light bulb comes on, and he figures out that this lieutenant is right. And he went, holy crap. You're right. We hadn't considered that. And that is a problem. You're right. And the entire 2nd Marine Division invasion plan for Desert Storm had one piece of it that was going to affect all the breach lanes changed in every single breach lane, because you had a 2nd lieutenant who I think came up in a battalion. He wasn't in my battalion, and I had a great battalion, but had the leadership that had created in him the temerity to be able to stand on his own 2 feet and not walk out of that rock drill until he was clear. Because now it could have gone the other way, where the colonel could have said, hey, we're doing, and then he would have gone, oh, I get it. All right, great. Now I'm good. Okay. But that wasn't the case. He stood his ground and made the colonel explain, to the point where the colonel, it wasn't quite 5 whys, took 3. But after the 3rd why, things changed. And that was one of the best leadership lessons I've ever heard. And that, again, it goes back to leaders that listen and create an environment where they are forced to listen, or can listen, because they've developed young leaders under them who are willing to question things, and they're technically and they haven't turned into this ogre that belittles someone for maybe not being clear. But it's not their fault that it isn't clear. It's your fault. You're the leader. If he's not clear on it, it's you gave a bad order. Now, if he walks out and he's clear, not clear, then it is his fault. But until that point, till that happens, until they walk out and say, I got it, it's on you. And you have to, you got to listen.
Yeah, and him speaking up, it's kudos on both ends. Kudos for listening, and kudos for having the courage to speak up. And let's say,
great leadership lesson.
And let's say, and to create the environment that he felt safe on doing that, because you think about it, if somebody spoke up, you wouldn't have had the Challenger disaster.
Yeah,
and there's a whole lot of groupthink situations where
it's
like go along to get along, and you see, and then you end up having these horrible consequences, which sounds like that could have been one of them.
Yeah, you can't prove a negative. I don't know that it would have resulted in a terrible thing happening. I don't know, but the plan changed, and maybe the knock-on effects of that change in the plan had a positive effect throughout the entire division, and the rest is history. 100 hours later, Saddam surrendered. So
hard to tell, but at least if he was passionate enough about the fact that, hey, I'm going to keep hammering this point until at least I know I might not win, but at least I know you understand what I'm trying to get across to you. And it's anytime, like I said, you have direct orders, but we have something that's a safety issue. It's like, okay, I don't care if it, like you said, it's using the example of, okay, I don't care if it's the chief itself, the battalion chief, the captain, the lieutenant, it doesn't matter who it is. They order X, like, hey, I think that floor is going to collapse, right? I think this, they may see something you don't see. Obviously, that second lieutenant saw something that colonel didn't see. And granted, I don't.
Neither did the hundreds of other people in the room.
Yeah.
Nobody saw it but him, or if they did see it, they didn't have the temerity to say something about it because they didn't want to be embarrassed. He had the moral backbone and the discipline and the moral. He wasn't morally lazy or intellectually lazy. He took the step and he took a risk.
Yeah.
Okay. But he did it for all the right reasons and everything else. So I'm
sure his approach to the colonel was respectful. It wasn't, hey, you're, obviously, because I've seen people give that kind of feedback where it wasn't as respectful as it could be. And then all of a sudden people aren't listening, not because maybe the person was 100% right, but the way they came across with it, it was very disrespectful. And of course, they just shut it off because of the tone it came across, not because of the validity of the argument. But for him to stand his ground and keep pushing the point that I don't think this is safe, or I don't think this is right, or I think this could cause a problem. Like I said, kudos on him for bringing it up and having the stones to do it. But on the other hand, and kudos on the old crusty colonel for actually listening and hearing him out and realizing, wow, okay, there's actually something to it.
One of my worst habits, and my wife will tell you this, is I get thinking about something and we'll be having a discussion and I'll like jump in and interrupt her and like finish her sentence or whatever. And I don't, I have to be better about that. And it's not, and it comes from a good place, I think, in that I get excited about it and I want to contribute. But by doing that, I stifle her ideas or her ability to express something. And I know I've probably done that with other people as well. And so to me, again, listening completely.
Yeah.
Not just to the first part of the issue and immediately starting to formulate something in your head and being so excited about getting it out that you stop the conversation.
Yeah.
But allowing whoever it is to finish their thought and then come in.
Right.
You're very good at that. And my kudos to you on it. Something I know that it's something I need to work on, get better at.
There's a lot of people that will listen, let's say, and then when it hits, they start formulating it. And now it's like, I'm not hearing anything you're saying. I'm not listening to you. I'm just waiting for you to need enough oxygen to stop to take a breath so I can jump in, versus trying to do that. I remember an interesting story from Marshall Goldsmith. I mean, he's written some great books, but one of the things he talked about was adding too much value. And you're like, you hear it was the buzzword forever. Add value, add value, add value. You're like, this is all you hear. This is the buzzword. Okay, well, all right, I'm a sucker. How do you add too much value? He talked about somebody bringing to you as the leader, someone bringing an idea. Oh, okay. Well, hell, I'm excited about this. And hey, Giles, what do you think about that? And blah, blah, blah. And boom, great idea. Now, you've been around a lot longer than they have. Maybe it's a junior leader. Like I said, to use your same example, you're the lieutenant colonel. Maybe they're the second lieutenant, right? They're brand new. But all of a sudden, that's great. But you might want to change this, do that. And they maybe make the plan 5% better. But by doing that and throwing their 2 cents worth into it, they've taken away probably 75% of their person's motivation to do it, because now it's your plan as the leader, because now you put your stamp on it and you own it. Now it's your plan, not their plan. So they might do it, but they're not going to have that same enthusiasm and zeal to do it. So he coined that as adding too much value. And I was like, he said, is that 5% truly improvement on the plan worth the 50 to 75% reduction in their enthusiasm to actually execute?
And that's a balance as a leader. I think that's something you have to be able to strike with any organization you're a part of, is finding that balance. Sometimes you need to let the train wreck happen, because the lessons learned from the train wreck, as long as it's not, you're not putting lives at risk or whatever, but sometimes you let the train wreck happen because the lessons that are going to be learned and the value of that exceeds the consequences of whatever level of failure that might be. And oh, by the way, as a good leader, the failure is yours. It's not theirs, it's yours. Your job is to accept consequences and pass out praise, not the other way. So, and that's a balance, and that's an art too. But again, that art and that balance and the ability to recognize that is informed through years and years and years of making decisions, reading, honing your instincts, educating your instincts through all kinds of different venues, like this, like reading, like movies, whatever it might be, whatever it is that gets you that clarity.
There's no need to train leaders. We talk about this a lot. And then basically you don't give them projects to do or things to do. Or basically you're giving the book knowledge, but you don't give them the execution knowledge to do it. And like I said, small things that aren't going to bankrupt the company, but things to where, if they fall down and skin their knee, it's not going to be the end of the world. It might be an expensive lesson, but it's a lesson they'll never forget. And so you got to have that opportunity to practice. And like you said, sometimes the train wreck is more valuable than you putting your 2 cents worth into it. And okay, well, it got done, but nobody learned. And with that one, like I said, they might have learned. And that's where you're, as you said, you're constantly building on each other and constantly getting better. A lot of times we get better and we do things differently, or because of those debriefs and after actions and hot watches after some kind of a failure. Okay, well, what can we do to not make this happen again? How can we change the way we do things? So speaking about changing the way we do things, last question, what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
Never stop learning. There's leadership happening around you every day. Never miss an opportunity to learn from it. Never miss an opportunity to become part of an organization as a follower or as a leader or as a mid-level whatever, because you're going to learn something every single time. I don't care whether you're 63 years old like I am, or 13 years old and you're a Boy Scout in a Boy Scout troop and you're learning something there. It doesn't matter. Don't stop learning. Okay, when you read, like I said, I'm reading this book by this Royal Marine. It's a leadership. Oh, for crying out loud! You're 63 years old. You're not. You've done all of these things. Why are you? You could write the book. People will tell me. I'm like, yeah, but maybe I could, but I haven't. And two, there are magnificent leaders out there, and every time I read it, every time I look at it, I get I get something new. There's a great leader who runs an organization called the Fidelis Leadership Group. His name is Mike Etor. He's a Marine. And he has published a number of books about leadership and also about philosophy and about the Stoics and sort of some of these great examples of leadership that sustained people in some of the most dire circumstances. Admiral James Stockdale, who we all remember, was a Navy pilot who spent 7 years, I think, in the Hanoi Hilton. Received the Medal of Honor for his leadership while in captivity. One of the things that sustained him during that torture and everything else that he had to endure, and then, oh, by the way, set an example for the other prisoners in the course of that just incredible test of his moral compass and everything, is the fact that as a young man and as a midshipman and as a young leader, he read some of the most basic books on philosophy by the Stoics. And one was this one particular Stoic called Epictetus.
Yep.
Okay, there's him, there's Marcus Aurelius, another great, sort of Stoic and things like that. And he, when you read about when he was shot down, he's actually floating into a lake in the middle of Hanoi in his parachute. And in his brain, he literally said to himself, I am now going into the world of Epictetus, where you have to accept the things that you cannot control. And you control the things you can.
Yeah.
And live within that universe of activity and action. And so when Mike Etor talks about that, and he publishes these books and he relates them to particular things, and then he finds a leadership lesson, I mean, those are connecting files that I don't necessarily have. I haven't studied that as deeply as he has. I have, you have the benefit of thousands of years of leaders doing things. You're just absolutely irresponsible as a human being if you are going to be a leader from the day you, and as a United States Marine, till the day I die, I'm a leader. I have to be. That's required of me. It's part of the special trust and confidence. I have to earn that every day. That means that I never stop studying. I never stop learning. I never stop questioning myself in the mirror. I never stop saying, okay, here's what I didn't do well today, and here's what I can do better tomorrow. How do I become a Marcus Aurelius or a Mike Etor or a Dave Miles? How do I become that guy? Okay, that leader. How do I do that? I do it by learning from them. Okay, so yeah, you want to know, what leaders can do to improve? Never stop learning. Never stop watching podcasts. Never stop reading. Stop scrolling. Start reading.
More reading, less scrolling. I love it. I love it. I love it. That's a perfect wrap up. So tell the listeners how they can connect with you, your company, LinkedIn, whatever. If they say, hey man, I want to learn a lot more about this guy, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is probably the best way to do it.
Okay.
If there are particular questions that they have, they can get in touch with me there. We can do it through you, and you can make an introduction, and then we can go from there. And I'm happy to have those discussions. It's anytime somebody contacts me and wants to talk about leadership. I mean, to me, that is what an honor that is to me to be able to do that. There's a great movie, John Wayne. She wore a yellow ribbon. Okay, so at the end of the movie, he's this grizzled old cavalry captain, been in the Army for 30 plus years. And in those days, captains did retire, some of them at 30 years. They didn't just, automatically get promoted up the ranks. So retiring as a captain of the cavalry. And so the last day, his troop leaves the fort without him. Okay. Because he's retired. He's been retired. He received a silver watch and all the rest of this stuff. And so he goes back, goes back to his little cabin there on the post. And there's a young lady there with whom he's been speaking, and is sweet on one of his lieutenants that just left with the troop. And, are you sad or whatever? And he says, young lady, yesterday I was a captain in the cavalry. Lieutenants jumped when I growled, and I was the master of all I could see. Now I'd be happy if somebody just asked me to shoe a horse. And for guys who have retired and are no longer active duty in the Marines or active duty or leaders in various organizations to have somebody say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about leadership, or just, I have a question for you. What do you think? It actually is such a great privilege and an honor to be able to respond to that. And it gives you purpose to your life. It's a nobility of purpose that you can never give up. And so anybody who wants to talk to me about this sort of thing, or anything for that matter, if I can help, I'd be privileged and honored to do so. And like John Wayne, I'd be happy to help them shoe their horse if they need me to.
Shoe the horse. All right. Well, we will absolutely make sure that your link to your LinkedIn profile is in the description. And with that, thank you so much for your time and insight and perspectives. And we are going to wrap up this episode of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and we will see you all next time. Take care.